Hello, Warsaw! Or, get ready for this. Let me see if I can do this. Witaj, Warszawo. Yeah? Thank you, thank you. All right, so I'm going to be hanging out with you guys for the next 35 minutes. I hope you have as much fun as I do up here. I've got a lot of material to get through, so I don't know how much time we'll have for questions at the end, but if we run out, I'm going to be standing by the volunteer table in the other tent during the break, so if any of you would like to come talk to me afterwards, I'd love to talk to you too. So, my name is Hannah, as you know, or Han on Twitter and most of the rest of the internet. And I'm a product designer, so I do everything from UX all the way through to graphic design and CSS, and I combine those skills together to design products or services or experiences, whatever you want to call it. When I'm not designing experiences, I love to have them, especially when it involves textures and tactile things. I just have to show you guys about this picture really quickly because I'm really excited about it, so I'm going to take a quick second. I was at a sheep farm the other weekend. Has anyone here ever been to a sheep farm? I can barely see you guys. Oh, now I can. Oh, some of you have been to sheep farms. It's really cool. I got to cuddle all these lambs, and they were like the softest thing in the entire world. It was absolutely amazing. Highly recommend going to a sheep farm. All right, so back to business. For the last 7 years or so, I've been focused on ways to make music better on the web. You might know me from Last.fm, where I led design there for 5 years. I also accidentally made sort of a hit with Drinkify at a hack day. And more recently, This Is My Jam, which is the product that I'm working on now. I'm the design director there and the co-founder along with my colleague, Matthew Ogle. All right. I think we need a big fat context slide here, because most of you that I've talked to at this conference so far, you're developers, and some of you design too, or do content or business and other things. And like me, you're really focused on your craft. You're really focused on your area of expertise. Let's call it your bit, yeah? And we've heard some incredible talks at this conference that are super focused on this particular area. What I want to do today is sort of expand that out a little bit more and talk about how all these bits fit together to make a product. So I'm going to be asking you to kind of maybe think outside what you normally think about a bit, if that makes sense. Trees, forest, yeah? Why? Well, how many of you here really care about the product that you're building? That's good, that's healthy, most of you. All right, cool. Of those, how many of you would like to maybe control or influence it a little bit more? Yes, quite a lot of you. All right, buckle up, let's get going. Information slide coming. So I start every single project that I do with this simple framing. First, I ask the question of my clients or my colleagues, if I don't have a client, and most importantly, my users, what do you want? Like, what do you need, right? And then I ask them, why? Why do you want this? Why do you need this thing? And with those two pieces of information, then I go away and I figure out how to do it. This is not a question that I ask my clients or my users. In fact, this is the question that we figure out, right, as professionals. Now, here's the big secret. No one ever comes to you with this information. If there's one thing you're going to write this bit down now. No one ever comes to you and says, yeah, I want to make this thing, and here's why I want to make it. They usually come to you with the how. So you need to figure out how to, like, extract the what and the why from them by, like, whatever means necessary. Because if you don't have those two pieces of information, you're not going to be able to figure out how to do the how bit. I actually have a personal policy of not working with any clients that tell me how to do it, because that's my job. So we've talked a lot at this conference about the how, which is why I want to dig into this sort of what and the why. So the foresty bit from the previous slide, yeah? Another way of looking at this is through the lens of time. So when we're building things, first we investigate, right? We ask some questions and sort of narrow down as we go, and then at a certain point, we kind of like, okay, I think we know what we're doing now. Let's build this thing and start producing it, right? And then at a certain point, you do it all over again, and that's like an iteration, and I think that was like my interpretive dance. God, I don't know why I did that. That's one iteration. And I've actually been in a lot of situations where people sort of skip this bit down here. They think that maybe it's like boring or something, and they just want to get right to the production bit up here. And that can be really problematic because some people are like talking about what they're going to be doing, and other people are just, let's get coding right away. And it creates a bit of a rift in the product. It's really important that you do this at the same time. I once heard this described as turning the creative corner at a South by Southwest talk, and I think that's a really great phrase for this. It's so important that we do this together, because if not, what happens is you're not on the same page, and the questions that you ask during this period versus this period are really different from each other. Let me give you an example. It's 24 hours before the deadline of the project, everybody's madly debugging stuff, you're staying up super late, and somebody wanders in and they're like, yeah, I was thinking maybe we could like add this feature to the product, right? What's your response? You're like, fuck no, right? Or vice versa, you've been tasked with running a brainstorm, right? And you're trying to get people to think really big, and so you're like, okay, what are some great ideas or features that we could build for this thing? And someone's sitting in the back of the brainstorm like, yeah, I think we should build it in this language. It doesn't really make sense. That's where the problems happen. So why am I talking about this? Why does this matter? Because it's all about asking questions. I really believe that 50% of making things is learning to ask the right questions at the right time. If you can combine this with your talent or skill in that little area in your bit, you're golden. So using This Is My Jam as a case study, I'm going to highlight the questions that we asked ourselves when we were going through this investigation period. I'm going to unpack that what and the why, because those are really big questions. I'm going to unpack them into more focused questions that hopefully you can add to your toolkit as well. I think I have a drink here. It's really hard to drink with this thing on. Okay. All right, let's start with a little bit of a case study here. So in online music, there's basically two big problems. And if you're not familiar with online music, you're just going to have to trust me and take my word for it, because I'm standing up here and you're not. So the first problem is access. This is basically like, oh man, you have to hear that new Daft Punk track. It is so good. I don't care if we're like in a submarine and there's no internet right now and I'm on my mobile phone. I just want to get that track right now, yeah? The second problem is one of discovery, which is how did I even know about that new Daft Punk track in the first place? And roughly all the music products that we've seen over the last 10 years can loosely be defined in these two categories. And some of them solve both problems, but usually they try and solve one or the other, roughly. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is because access and discovery are examples of what we call, or what I call, first and second order problems. So to expand this out a little bit, here are some things that I would associate with first order problems. They're things like infrastructure, tools, needs, that sort of stuff. Whereas second order problems, I think, cluster a little bit more around the idea of like community or play or wants. So to expand this beyond music for a second, here's a few other examples. We heard about the amazing gov.uk website yesterday from Francis, and I think it's tempting to consider that maybe that website is an example of a first-order problem because it's solving a lot of needs and tools. But actually, I think what's going on there is that the first-order problem was just all of the consensus and all of the internal tools and the infrastructure of like getting everybody on board with this project. Like she was talking about yesterday, this screenshot's slightly out of date, but like all of the ministerial departments that had to get together to do this. And then on top of that, they built this amazing website with the bunting on and everything. Or a sillier example is in our studio, we like this thing called SodaStream. It puts bubbles in your water. Highly recommend it. Bubbly water, always nice. It's definitely an example of a second-order product. It's playful. But to do this, what do you need first? You need clean tap water, right? Near free drinking water. That's an example of a first-order thing. So this is a very useful question, I think, to ask yourself when you're faced with a new project. Is it solving for a first-order problem or a second-order problem? And the reason it's important to ask this is because both are really important and valuable, but they require very different strategies. Question number 1. Also, and this is really just, I threw this in here as like more of a personal aside for you guys, but these problems attract very different kind of people too. So I think it's really important to find out early on which one you like doing better. Like making shit is really hard. So doing it with people that like solving the same kinds of problems as you is going to make it a lot easier. And the sooner you figure out this for yourself, the happier it will make you in your career as well. So I really like working on second-order problems, as you've probably guessed by now, and this is my jam and is an example of one, so I'm going to be talking about that for the rest of this presentation. Now, if you're working on one, trends, actually, matter a little bit more. I know this is kind of a funny word to say, but because you're not solving for needs or infrastructure, because you're sort of trying to attract people to a community and it's about wants, trends are actually kind of important. The other thing about trends is that they're almost always cyclical in nature. They always emerge in opposition to the previous one. Marty Neumer, whom you may know from his design writing, sort of famously said, when everybody zigs, zag. So the idea is that it's very tempting to go along with the crowd and do what everyone else is doing and get excited about what they're getting excited about, when actually, if you want to do something really inventive, you sometimes have to do the opposite. Or here's another really silly example, okay? So in Canada, in the 70s, my parents were wearing trousers that looked like this, yeah? They had really wide legs. And then in the 80s, the trousers got real skinny at the bottoms. And then in the 90s, do you know what happened? They got really wide again, but this time they were not called bell-bottoms. They were rebranded as flares. And then in the noughties, they got really skinny again, which actually gives me a lot of dread for this next decade. Right, so what exactly did we do that was so contradictory at the time in 2011? Well, it helps to start by looking at the status quo. In 2011, a lot of music apps were actually borrowing from trends online in general. And some of these trends that we saw were things like big data and algorithms. So this really started with Last.fm and scrobbling, and then it went mainstream with the Facebook timeline thing and the Spotify ticker. Another thing that we saw is a lot of music services added a sort of newsfeed-esque component to what they were doing after the success of Facebook and Twitter. And then there was this whole constellation of like playlist making and sharing services, and it was like kind of like a mixtape without any constraints on it all of a sudden, like more is better. And lastly, what my friend Tim Heinecke has called spreadsheet music, this idea that music sort of became lists and links. So we knew that we wanted to make a second-order music service. We knew we wanted to make something playful, something ahead of the trend cycle, and a good exercise is to imagine the opposite of the current trends in your product. So some of the ones that we explored were 100% hand-picked instead of using big data and algorithms, slow instead of fast, less content instead of more content, and finally, sort of letting the visual expression and chaos of music shine through instead of spreadsheet music. So looking at the status quo and then imagining the opposites is a really good question to ask when you're investigating. This is what we made. This is my jam. It's really simple. You get one page where you put one and only one song, your current jam. It's not just any song, it's like the song that really means the most to you right now, the one you have on repeat on your iPod. It's a bit like a current musical status. You can change it whenever you like. And it also auto-expires after 7 days. And what do you get in return for this? You can follow people whose music taste you admire, and you get this ever-changing playlist of songs where they're not just any songs, but they're like somebody's favorite right now, like really good songs. So let's start by talking about this 100% hand-picked thing, right? That was the first thing I mentioned. How did we come about that? Well, When I started working at Last.fm back in 2006, I think that big data was actually just one really sexy problem to solve. I mean, like, there were just so many things to think about, right? There was like, the technical hurdles to overcome were so much fun. It was like, how do we track all this attention data? Where do we store it? There wasn't cloud storage yet. Okay, how do we retrieve that data down in a fraction of a second? Then how do we match it against another user's taste profile in another fraction of a second and serve it back to you? It was just like a really big, exciting problem. And a lot of what motivated us was doing things because we could. And that's great, you know? Technology drives design. That's really important to remember. But a conceptual breakthrough in itself doesn't necessarily make a product, especially a second-order product. Usually the sort of we can do it now feeling that I'm sure you've had in the past is an indicator of sort of like scratching at the surface of a first-order problem, or it might be like a hack day project or an experiment. So question the itch. Question your motivation. At Last.fm, when we were building this sort of first-order infrastructure stuff, this, you know, the big data thing, that was really just so that we could power all of these playful musical experiences on top of it. And while I was researching this, when I was working there, something happened to me over and over again when I talked to users. It was this. They kept on telling me that the best music recommendations come from friends. And so I think while there's a place for computer-generated recommendations, and we use a couple of them on Jam, we really had to question, like, what are people actually doing? If the best music recommendations come from friends, then maybe big data is perhaps just a because we can do it now trend. Why not make everything hand-picked instead? So question the behavior. Probably don't need to tell you guys that. All right, the second thing is sort of how do we pick the slow instead of fast, right? Rejecting real time. Well, there are a bunch of problems with trying to shove music into a real-time model. Let me count the ways. First of all, there's this blink and you miss it problem, right? Like someone may have tweeted some like really great music right now, but you're sitting at a conference. You can't listen to it. On Sunday afternoon when this conference is over and you're hanging out on your sofa having a drink and you want some new music to listen to, it would be great to get it all, except where'd it go? It's gone. Too bad you can't have it back. Secondly, it's just a completely different pace. And pace is really important. The pace of your content and how you think about it, when they're really different, could create sort of a jarring effect for a user. Like, reading something is very different than the amount of time it takes to listen to something. So, question the pace. Then there's context. I think personal context really matters when it comes to music, right? Like, this is something that really bothers me on Spotify, is that, like, how do I know if this is your favorite track, if this is the one that you absolutely love right now and I should definitely listen to it, or if this is just stuff that, like, you were playing on your computer, or maybe somebody else was playing on your computer even, right? And then lastly, and this is a really obvious one, physical context matters as well. So like in gaming, you know, music is something that requires peripherals. You need to have audio hooked up. If you don't have that, you're not going to be able to listen to it right now. So that was another reason why we rejected this. And, you know, so far, it's worked out pretty well for us. We recently just had 1 million jams shared, which I was pretty excited about. It doesn't sound like a big number, but you have to remember that they were all shared really slowly and really thoughtfully. So this asks the next question, which is why focus on a single song as a base unit instead of something like playlists? Well, remember this image that I showed you a few minutes ago of the records and friends? Well, we looked at that and we thought about the experience of listening to records with friends in real life. And then basically what we did is we crossed everything off the list that wasn't either compatible with existing online behaviors, so stuff that people are already doing that you can tap into, or something that was directly responsible for the behaviors that we wanted to elicit. And then we just started crossing them all off. And basically what we were left with was this one. This was the constraint that we thought would be really interesting for the product if we only let people share one thing at a time. And the effects of that where basically that the quality, and I mean artistically the quality, not the audio quality, is really, really high. So this is the popular page, and on any given day, you can go there and you can find this amazing mix of stuff, I think it's pretty good, that's like breaking tracks or old favorites. It's really, really high quality stuff. All right, so lastly, I want to talk about how music looks. At a time when this music coming out of the machine looked like spreadsheets, we decided to embrace the visual chaos of music, craft. Style, especially for designers, is a really loaded word, but I choose to define it as epithet. So basically, style is just a tool that you have at your disposal. It's just something in your designer's toolkit. And what you can do with this is you can use it to show the characteristics of something. So you might use your style to express how you are. I might use my style to express who I am. You might use style to express the look of hip-hop, the look of indie music, whatever it might be. When used appropriately, it can be really, really effective. Of course, when it's not used appropriately, it's just meaningless decoration. But the important thing to remember is that style is something that can actually attract the right audience to your product. Now, I know that some of you guys in the audience right now are like shutting off and you're like, I don't need to think about like visual stuff and style. That's not my job. And yes, I hear you and I know you're out there. But it is your job to care about this stuff, and here's why. Do you care about your users? Hands? You guys should all be raising your hands now, by the way. The answer should be like, fuck yes, right? Okay, good. You all care about your users. Great. Well, then it's really important to know what your users think is stylish, what they think is attractive, what they think is trendy. And even if that's not something that you love or you internalize, it's important that you know what that looks like for your users, because that's taste, and that helps you build better products for them. So try and have a more sharply tuned radar for those things if you think that maybe that's not an area that you're focusing on right now. It really, really helps. So we believe that style is a way that you can express your personality and the characteristics of your music taste. So I'm going to dig into this and show you some of the design archives here. Ready? Okay, so I pulled this stuff out of my laptop, excuse me. So this was like one of the very first prototypes that I did for Jam. As you can see, it's really plain and also really ugly. But there is something interesting to note here, which is that this image here is the music, and it's really, really big. And at the time, that was actually pretty unusual. It was pretty uncommon, because music was like a little row in a list, and it was like track by artist. Well, it turned out that people really liked this, and that was cool. So then we added backgrounds, and backgrounds were really neat, and people started doing things where they put their backgrounds together with their images. And we got users like ATP Festival doing this kind of stuff, and we sort of thought, okay, this might be working. And then we decided to change the layout so that we could put a little bit more focus on the jam, on the image there in the middle. And people started doing really interesting things with how these two layers of visuals fit together. We even had a developer from the community contribute this, which is Jamouflage, and it basically makes your middle bit sort of disappear into the background so that you can have like a full screen image. And that was the point where we thought, okay, this is really neat, but we need to make it a bit easier for people to sort of like be stylish with one click. And so just recently what we did is we added the ability to do this. I borrowed a bunch of style cues from music, from street fashion, from visual culture, and the internet, that kind of stuff at large. And then I worked with our developer, Andreas Jansen, very talented person, to figure out how we could apply some of this style programmatically to your jam in a way that was unique every single time. And we got some really interesting effects. And now with just one click, it's really easy to make your music look like something that belongs to you, like something that you made. We think that's really important. And here's a few other examples of what it looks like. This is a default. This is something I really believe in. Like, sexy defaults are really important when you're making products. Don't let things be blank pages or blank boxes that people have to fill in. Just make it work for them. Or, if you want to click a button and do something a bit different, you can make it look like that. So, I think I'm almost ready to wrap up here. So, the questions Because remember, 50% of making something is just asking the right questions at the right time. Some of the questions we asked today were, what are we making? Why are we making it? 2 most important things. If you're going to write something down, write that down. And then secondly, do this during the investigation period, before you guys turn the Creative Corner together and go into production. Figure out what kind of problem you're working on. Are you solving for a first-order problem, or are you working on a second-order problem? And question your itch. Why are you doing this? Are you doing it just because you can, because technically it's available now, or because that will really make a good product? Question the behavior. Always question the behavior. Watch your users. Really, really look at them. Ask yourself, is this fancy new technology that I want to use, is this trend that everybody's excited about, does that really fit with the behavior of how these people are actually doing what it is we want them to do? Question the pace. What is the pace of the content that you're going to be serving up? Look at the constraints. Watch those people in real life doing their thing. What is required there? What makes sense on the internet? What doesn't make sense? And lastly, question the appropriate style. Look at these people. Look at what they're wearing. Look at what they're into. What kind of music do they listen to? How is there something interesting there that you might be able to pull out and put into your own product? But most importantly, question the opposite. You just might create something that meets new emerging desires. Thank you very much. I think we've got about I think we've got about 4 minutes for questions. So if anyone has any, now's your chance. Or I can let you go early, and you can all run off to get another beer before the next session. Any questions?
No questions.
No? Okay. You guys are all tired. I'm a bit tired too now. Great. Okay, thanks very much for your time, everyone.